This is your moment. This is your moment in time. This is your moment. This is your moment to shine, to shine, to shine. So shine on. And every time you hit the wall, remember you can have it all, even the mighty fall. It's closer than it's ever been, and now it's more than just a win. It's where your life begins, yeah. There's no holding back, no overthinking. You've been reaching all your life. This is your moment. This is your moment in time. This is your moment. This is your moment to shine, to shine, to shine. This is your moment. You got to give it all that you got. Don't hesitate and don't ever stop. You've spent a lifetime waiting for this day. This is your moment. Now's not the time for you to hold back. Don't overthink, it's time to react. The moment has come, don't let it slip away, away, away. It's closer than it's ever been, and now it's more than just a win. It's where your life begins. You've tamed the voices in your head. You've put your courage to the test. Laid all your doubts to rest. Your mind is clearer than before. Your heart is full and wanting more. Your future's at the door. Give it all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Samanthropolitics, a show where we talk about global politics and women's rights. Obviously, things are heating up in the United States as our election is about a week and a half away. I don't know how everyone else is feeling, but I am incredibly nervous thinking about what could potentially be a new era of American politics. So I wanted to go over a little bit of world news before we bring in our expert today. Just so you know, our main crux of the show today is going to be talking about cybersecurity, Russian disinformation, and Iranian disinformation with regards to the U.S. elections with expert on cybersecurity, Crispin Burke. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the debate last night and also talk about some world news. So in terms of good world news that I'd love to highlight, is Jacinda Ardern. Her Labour Party won again in a landslide. She's New Zealand's youngest prime minister and also the second world leader, only the second, to give birth while in office. I love that picture of her at the UN General Assembly holding her baby. Now, New Zealand has done exceptionally well with regards to COVID. They had totally stamped it out. I think it was in July. Then there was a little bit of a resurgence in August, and now it's been stamped out for a second time in October. What I want to pay attention to as somebody who studies women's leadership is, why is she so popular? Now, let's watch this video first, and then let's talk about why she's so popular with the people of New Zealand, or the Kiwis, as you call them.
Evening, everyone. That I would jump online quickly and just check in with everyone, really, as we all prepare to hunker down for a few weeks. Excuse the casual attire. It's a can be a messy business putting toddlers to bed, so I'm not in my work clothes, so forgive me for that. I do just want to prepare everyone that because of the lag with COVID-19, the time from someone having contact with someone who has it, catching it themselves, them being symptomatic and being tested and positive, there's a number of days before all of that happens. So we won't see the positive benefits of all of the effort you're about to put in for self-isolation for a few days yet, quite a number of days. I'd say at least 10 days. So don't be disheartened. Our numbers are going to go up. And the modelling I've seen suggests that they will go up quite considerably. We'll see quite a steep rise. In fact, I'm expecting we may see several thousand cases over a period of time until we then will start to, we hope, see the effects of what we're doing with self-isolation having a positive impact. So don't be disheartened when you see that. Don't be disheartened when you see that ongoing increase because of that lag. All of the efforts that we're putting in should eventually show if we all follow the rules. Till then, do check in on your neighbours. Do especially check on those who may be elderly. Give them a call, see what their needs are. And if you can help them, go out and grab their essentials and pop them on the front door for them. Just remembering the way we can keep them safe is by keeping our distance. Remember, stay at home, break the chain, and you'll save lives. And it's as simple as that. That's everyone's job for the next 4 months.
So let's talk about what we just saw. So first of all, she appears in a kind of ratty olive green sweatshirt. Clearly, like, almost looks like she's in bed holding her iPhone in her hand. And, she first apologizes for her, her sweats and says, sorry, this is what it's like when you put a toddler to bed. My New Zealand accent is just not great. But, giving that sense to women of like, oh my gosh, like she also knows what it's like to be crazy, like putting a toddler to bed, like trying to do a million things. And just like the relatability of that, so many politicians are so A, scripted, and B, so incredibly polished. Like every time they appear on camera, they have to be, lipsticked and a perfect suit and perfect hair. And if they're not, they're criticized. And so her ability to just kind of break that mold of especially women having to like look perfect and be quote unquote perfect on camera, I think is really incredibly liberating for women who are like, oh, if the Prime Minister of New Zealand can hop on in sweats and, give this chat, like maybe I can hop on in sweats. So the other thing that I think struck me, and I don't know if it struck you, is that she's just so nice. She's so nice. She's so apologetic. She's so empathetic of like, I understand what you're going through. This isn't easy for anyone. Let's work together to break the chain. This concept of actually coming together, like hop on your neighbor's doorstep, like help them with their groceries. She encourages people to help one another. And I think the style of leadership is the style of leadership that we really need going forward in the world of empathy, transparency, compassion, relatability. She also was like that with regards to the Christchurch shootings. So going back to that slideshow, she put on a hijab to show empathy with the Muslim population that was largely targeted in the Christchurch shootings. And she was really lauded for her empathy with that population. And she also passed gun laws, like instantly. It was like, okay, we're done here. No more guns. Then again, she didn't have a Congress to deal with like we do, of 1 million people and a lobbying group of the NRA trying to block it. But still was like, okay, we're done with guns. So, as somebody who's teaching a women's leadership course, which by the way starts in about a week, so if you're interested in it, I will post the link to it in the chat. It's Empower Global, the Women's Leadership Challenge. As somebody who's teaching this, we're actually going to do a case study on Jacinda. And I really feel like she exemplifies this new type of leader that we really need in this era of a global pandemic where people are in pain. They are grieving. they are lonely, they are isolated, they are overburdened, like especially moms right now. And I think that this type of leader, which is not about command and control, but essentially at its heart, she is about taking care of people. And you can hear that in her words, and helping and encouraging people to take care of one another. I think that's a big part of the reason why so many of these COVID countries led by women did so well. I mean, there's also the aspect of transparency of her and Merkel, and I think it was the Prime Minister of Finland, all being incredibly transparent. I mean, she just hopped on Facebook Live. That wasn't a press conference. That was her, in her bedroom at 9 p.m. on Facebook Live after putting her kid to bed. So there was also the transparency very early on with the population of what was happening with regards to COVID, what needed to happen in order to stop its spread, and putting in controls very, very, very quickly versus waiting on it. And, in America, we love to say, our hopes and prayers are with you, like praying that like this was magically going to go away. So there was also that element of transparency. And I think to be transparent when there's a huge, huge, huge crisis that's about to strike a country and like kill a lot of people is humility. And you can just tell that she has this humility in spades. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the next generation of female leaders, especially that I think will start to model themselves less after, the Hillary Clintons of always kind of polished and put together and scripted, and more towards the Jacinda of the Facebook Lives and the ratty sweatshirts and the I'm with you and here's my baby at the UN General Assembly and I'm not embarrassed about it. I really hope that we start to see that more, and I hope we start to see male leaders also realize that this is a moment where the command and control hierarchical style of leadership just doesn't work. It's not effective. People need to feel like you care about them. And so I hope that our male leaders will also start to embody these qualities as well, recognizing that that's what will set them apart, and that's what's going to help get rid of this virus once and for all. So I'll throw in the chat the link for the challenge if I can, in case you're a woman leader or aspiring woman leader and you're interested in learning more about these issues. It's empowerglobal.net/news/online challenge. Moving on. Amy Coney Barrett will likely be confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is crazy, the amount of time that Merrick Garland was hung out to dry. I don't even remember how many months it was, 6 or 8 months, whereas basically the Senate Republicans have rammed through Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court right before the election, even though Lindsey Graham about a year ago said, if the same thing happens, I would never let this, the people, American people will decide. So even though he said that, they're still ramming through this nomination. Interesting twist is actually Democrats are calling for the removal of one of our own, or one of their own. So they're calling for the removal of Dianne Feinstein, who's in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Feinstein is an 87-year-old California Democrat in her 5th full term. At the end of the hearings, she hugged Chairman Lindsey Graham, which is who I just talked about, who hypocritically said, if the same thing happened in another year, he would wait for the people to decide, and then totally backtracked. And she also said to him that this is the best set of hearings I've ever participated in, and I want to thank you for your fairness and opportunity of going back and forth. So she said that despite the fact that, if Coney Barrett is elected, we could face the end of the ACA, the end of abortion rights, backtracks with regards to LGBTQ, civil rights, so many things. But for some reason, and like as a Democrat, she should really care about that. And yet for some reason, she just had a love fest with Lindsey Graham at the end of the hearings. So that was also interesting. Also today out is the newest Borat movie by Sacha Baron Cohen, who is hilarious, where apparently there is a scene with Rudy Giuliani with his hands down his pants, and someone posing as Sacha Baron Cohen's daughter as like a Russian reporter. So that's kind of turned into a big scandal, and I'm sure this movie is going to be totally over the top but hilarious. I have yet to see it. So the U.S. debate. So let's just turn this off. So last night we saw the last presidential debate. Instead of the town hall, finally Trump no longer has COVID, hopefully, and we saw our last presidential debate. The hallmark of this debate was that it was a debate. It was actually a debate. It wasn't a fight between two people that just overlapped and you couldn't keep it straight. I don't know how many people you've talked to, whoever in the audience, but most people I talked to were like, yeah, I stopped watching the first debate after 15 minutes, after 30 minutes, because there was no policy. It was just talking over and accusations, and like there was no policy. So something I want to go over some of the things that happened in the debate that stuck out to me, and also correct some falsehoods that were perpetuated during the debate, and talk about some things that people don't actually know. So what I find generally striking about Trump is that usually if somebody is running for re-election, and they're the incumbent, they will use the debate to talk about all of the accomplishments they've made. They will use the debate to go over, here are the 50 things that I've accomplished in the last 10 years. Or sorry, not the last 10 years. The 50 things that I've accomplished in the last 4 years. For some reason, Trump, I don't know if he didn't have his debate team prep him correctly, but he didn't really talk about any particular accomplishments. Nor did he dive into actually any plans. It's saying, oh, I'll have a different healthcare plan. Okay, but what does that consist of? I have a COVID plan. Okay, what does that consist of? So that was really striking, whereas Biden, who was not the planner or the very sophisticated policy person at the beginning of this, is now starting to show that he has more sophisticated policy plans to deal with these issues. I want to talk about immigration. So the immigration stuff is pretty tricky. So interestingly, there's actually been more people that were deported under Obama than under Trump, despite the ICE, a huge ICE effort. However, and there was also a claim last night that when Trump was asked about the 545 children that were separated from their parents at the border and still have yet to be reunited with their parents, and they can't find their parents. The Trump administration didn't keep track of where these kids' parents were. I don't know why. Like, I always just think, like, from an economic sense, like, why would we want, from an economic sense, to be taking care of 545 children, like some as young as like 6 months old? Like, that doesn't seem that useful, like when they have parents that love them and want to be with them. So he was asked this in the debate, and he did say, like, Joe, what about the cages under you? What about the cages under you? So in fact, some of the what's called the quote unquote cages, which were like the chain linked encampments that these children are kept in, were present under Obama. However, under the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which was under Obama, they could not be held there for more than 72 hours. So that has not been the case under Trump. So they're being held far longer than that under Trump. The other thing that's really different is just the Obama administration never had a policy of separating families. That was not an Obama administration policy at all. And the other major difference is the Obama administration did not deport people and make them go wait in Mexico in a pretty dangerous gang-ridden area to await their asylum claims in the United States. That also never happened. That's new to the Trump administration. Trump had a claim that the kids are so well taken care of and the facilities are so clean, when in fact it was shown that the children were subjected to sickness and disease and unsanitary cells for weeks and weeks and weeks without adequate soap, showers, toothpaste, toilet paper, and they were held in places like office buildings, which weren't even designed to house people. So that's, I think, important to talk about. Trump also said that that Biden was going to stop all deportations, and of course, Trump is always talking about people that come to the U.S. as criminals and coyotes and felons, and that's like a very marginal portion of the people that come across the southern border. Oh, and fun fact, terrorists don't come through the southern border. They come from our hometowns and from abroad. There's no terrorists coming up through the southern border. That is a complete and total falsehood. There's more likely to be a terrorist at this point that's literally in the hometown where you grew up in whatever small town you were in, than there is to be a terrorist coming across the southern border that's going to commit an attack. We just have to face the fact that our biggest threat is from the inside, and that's hard to face because we don't want to believe that people like us want to kill us. It's easier to believe that the other, somebody who's brown or speaks Spanish and isn't from this country, would want to kill you, and versus your own neighbor. And unfortunately, after working in countries like Bosnia, and that's unfortunately like not the case, and it's really sad. Neighbors will kill neighbors. So the other thing that Trump said was that only those with the lowest IQ used to come back for their hearings. That was just made up. I mean, there is zero evidence at all of this idea that the only people that come back for their asylum claim hearings are the ones with low IQ. I mean, he literally just made that up out of total thin air, as if like the only people, that come back are the dumbest people. I don't really understand where that came from. It is important to note, though, that there were a significant amount of deportations under Obama, that we had a pretty hardline immigration policy then, but it was not as bad as it is now in terms of, just deporting like everybody that we see, and in terms of the separation of kids from their parents, and in terms of putting people in Mexico to await their asylum claims, and then these really horrifying reports of hysterectomies being performed on women in ICE detention centers involuntarily. I mean, this is like the forced sterilization campaigns of Native Americans in the U.S. like years ago, and in Peru. It is the most horrifying human rights abuse I've frankly ever heard, and I'd love to do a whole show on that once we're done with the election. One other thing that Trump said was with regards to African Americans. So let's watch what he said here. All right, we're not having sound for some reason. I'm not sure why. Let's try this one more way. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's see if this works. I don't know why we don't have sound. It's very weird. Sorry, everyone. Tech issues. Let's try this one more time with a different link. And this is Trump talking about him and the African American population. So we're just going to try one more thing here. Thank you for your patience. All right, let's see if that works. There we go.
My family and I envisioned Biscuit as being a place for families and friends to come together. So we were sad to close when Texas issued its stay-at-home order. But we quickly switched to curbside pickup and updated our Google profile. We also started a produce delivery service, getting food to people who couldn't easily make it to a grocery store. It meant a lot to us to be there for our community.
As far as my relationships with all people, I think I have great relationships with all people. I am the least racist person in this room.
What do you say to Americans who are concerned by that rhetoric?
I don't know.
by
I mean, I
the
don't know
videos?
what to say. I got criminal justice reform done and prison reform and opportunity zones. I took care of black colleges and universities. I don't know what to say. They can say anything. I mean, they can say anything. It makes me sad because I am the least racist person. I can't even see the audience because it's so dark. But I don't care who's in the audience. I'm the least racist person in this room.
Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history. He pours fuel on every single racist fire, every single one. He started off his campaign coming down the escalator saying he's going to get rid of those Mexican rapists. He's banned Muslims because they're Muslims. He has moved around and made everything worse across the board. He says about the poor boys, last time we were on stage here, he said, I told them to stand down and stand ready. Come on. This guy has a dog whistle about as big as a foghorn.
So Trump's awesome quote, I am the least racist person in this room. So one thing that shows is, so I do want to say, like, Trump has actually done some things with regards to criminal justice reform that have reduced the prison population, but not by a whole lot. And they have commuted some sentences. However, as somebody who teaches diversity and inclusion trainings, when somebody says I'm the least racist person in the room, that shows that they don't have an understanding of their own biases, own background. And also it's a lack of understanding about the bigger picture of that the work that we have to do now with regards to criminal justice reform, dismantling structural racism is called anti-racism. And it's the idea that being an ally is actively working to dismantle those racist structures. Just saying I'm not a racist or everyone's the same color to me doesn't cut it in terms of allyship. That's really more like being a bystander. You have to actively work to dismantle those structures. And so if you're the president and you have the power to do so many things, whether it's with regards to the police or criminal justice reform, you have an incredible amount of power. But by Trump, instead of saying, here are all of the amazing things that I've done, and here are all of the amazing things I will do with regards to criminal justice reform, and here's what I'm going to do about the police violence that's occurring, that's killing Black Americans, his response is just that I'm the least racist person in the room. And saying the other thing that he said is he's done more for the Black community than any president except for Abraham Lincoln. Now, among modern presidents, historians agree that the most significant legislative achievements for the African American population belong to President Lyndon B. Johnson, who shepherded the passage of the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act. In a 2017 study that assessed modern presidents based on this analysis of looking at racial reform, ranked Mr. Johnson at the top, and Trump was placed in the bottom third. So that's really important. Trump also claimed that Biden had repeatedly called African Americans super predators. That actually wasn't true. That was actually Hillary Clinton, as sad as that makes me, who was then First Lady. So that actually didn't happen. But what is true is that some of Mr. Biden's work back when he was in the Senate in the 90s did lay the groundwork for mass incarceration that's really affected America's Black communities. And I think he's shown a lot of contrition for that. Like, for example, the 3 strikes rule, which said, the third time that you have something against you, even if it's a drug possession, you're in jail for the rest of your life. That was a huge, huge, huge problem. And so now, in terms of his policies, and this is looking, do people change? Like, should people be defined by everything they did in the past? He really wants to reduce the number of people incarcerated in the country, and recognizing that it's a problem. And I mean, on the Biden website, it says no one should be incarcerated for drug use alone. And he really emphasized last night that recidivism is a lot of the times because putting people back in jail isn't actually dealing with the root problem. Why are they in crime? Why are they doing drugs? Why are they selling drugs? And some of the best actually programs that are shown to reduce recidivism is cognitive behavioral therapy. But it's expensive and it takes time. But I think by Biden making a big point that rehabilitation is really important, and that drug users shouldn't be put necessarily into prison, but into rehab programs where they could access services like cognitive behavioral therapy, shows that he really understands the impact that had. So there was also some very funny stuff about pillows and blankets. I don't know. That was just very odd. But anyway, the main point of this debate, what that was exciting, was that it was an actual debate. Whether it's actually going to change anyone's mind at this point remains to be seen. We're so close to the election, and so many people have cast their votes early at this point that I don't know if it's really going to have that much of an impact on which way people lean. All right, so we're moving on to our guest. Thank you for listening to me talk about all of these issues that are incredibly important as we lead up to the United States election. But now we're going to talk about another issue, which is disinformation perpetrated by other countries within the United States, which is a big problem that showed itself in 2016 and now has evolved. And you see more and more non-state actors and official state actors getting involved in the fray of cybercrime. So our guest that I'm about to welcome, his name is Crispin Burke. He has a newsletter at Substack called The Gray Zone, which focuses on cyber and information warfare, drones, and political warfare, including a brief history of Russian poisonings. Navalny, anyone? He completed a master's degree in cybersecurity, where his master's thesis was about state-sponsored cybercrime. He also wants to iterate that his views are completely his own and they do not represent his current employer. So without any further ado, let's bring in Chris.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Chris, wait, look at that shirt. Can you show off that shirt?
Hey, eyes are up here.
What does that shirt mean to you? Let's talk about that shirt. What does the shirt mean to you?
So this came out in the aftermath of the 2016 elections. You saw a lot of shirts like this that said, "Dance like Russia isn't watching." So you've always heard that phrase, "Dance like nobody is watching." Well, dance like the Russian hackers are not watching you at this moment.
So funny. There was a talk that was when I gave my TED Talk, someone else gave their TED Talk on Chinese facial recognition and how just like when you're in China, like they're just watching you everywhere. Like they just like have eyes on you everywhere. It's just so wild to think about,
Well, it's like what they say about the U.S. government, the NSA, the only branch of the government that actually listens.
I love that. So I want to talk about a story that came out this week that was just so weird. So NPR in Gainesville, Florida, reported this week that a bunch of registered Democratic voters in certain counties in Florida, and Florida is a notorious swing state. That, sometimes they say that whoever takes Florida takes the election. And in 2000, Florida was really important because that was the Bush v. Gore debate, and it all came down to 584 votes, I think it was. In Florida.
And it has swung back and forth throughout elections, and it's got 27 electoral votes last I counted. So that's a very important state. That's
right, and it's winner take all. So
yes.
Whoever wins, you could win by 2 votes, but as long as it's a majority, whoever wins that state then gets, when Hillary lost Florida in 2016, kind of everyone knew it was all over for Hillary.
Yes.
So anyway, these Democratic voters got an email that was from the subject. The email address was the info@officialproudboys.com.
Yes.
Now everybody knows from Trump talking about the Proud Boys, and they've kind of been in the news because he told them to stand by and stand ready for the elections to intimidate voters. And they're a white supremacist group that were placed in the spotlight by President Trump. So this is what the email said. We are in possession of all of your information. You are currently registered as a Democrat, and we know this because we have gained access into the entire voting infrastructure. Make my voice lower. You will vote for Trump on election day, or we will come after you. Change your party affiliation to Republican to let us know you received our message and will comply. We will know which candidate you voted for. I would take this seriously if I were you. What the heck is this, Chris? What was this email? Who did it come from? What is going on here?
So there are a lot of reasons to really be skeptical about this. And one of the first people who really blew the whistle was Dr. Thomas Rid, who teaches at Johns Hopkins University, very close by. He writes a lot of books about cyber and information warfare, including this book, Active Measures: The Secret History of Disinformation and Political Warfare. He was very cautious about we need to really consider where this might be coming from, and there were a lot of reasons to be skeptical of this email. So let's start off with the first. According to that article that you have from Gainesville, Florida, the chairman of the Proud Boys denied it, saying, "Hey, this definitely was not us." So I guess the first question is, should you believe the Proud Boys when they say this? And so I have no love for extremist group that's a white supremacist group. However, when they say they didn't send this out, you may want to listen, because this would be evidence of actual voter suppression. So it would be very, very foolish for somebody to send this out, because you're probably going to jail, right? So there's reason to be suspicious there. Another reason to be suspicious is because the people that were hosting officialproudboys.org had actually dropped their ties with the Proud Boys on Monday of this week. Shortly thereafter, somebody else had bought the domain officialproudboys.org. Who did that? We'll see. Also, changing your voter registration.
I went to the webpage today just to see if it existed, and it just said it was down. it was like, this page is not available. I was like, okay.
The other thing is that asking somebody to change their voter registration party from Republican to Democrat, Democrat to Republican is a very, very odd request. So for a number of reasons. First of all, a lot of people have already cast their ballots, so it's too late to do anything about that. The other reason is that your party affiliation in the voter registration database really only makes sense during the primaries. It doesn't make sense during the general election. If you are a registered Republican, you can vote for Joe Biden. If you're a registered Democrat, you can vote for Donald Trump. That has no bearing on whom you will vote for in the general election. So this is a very, very odd request. The other thing is that they say, we will know who you voted for.
I love that. That just cracks me up.
Yeah. Nobody knows who you voted for. People will know if you voted, but people don't know who you voted for.
Right. The only way we get, some of that kind of those predictions are from exit polls.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing that's very suspicious is that this group claims that they know everything about the voters, their email, their home addresses, etc. Strangely enough, a lot of that information is already on the public record. When you register to vote, your information goes into a database, and I won't say that everybody on the street has this information, but if you want to buy that information, you can. So if you're the, let's say, Florida Republican Party, and you want to make sure that Republicans get out to vote, you can buy that data. You can send materials to potential voters saying, hey, make sure you register to vote and vote for this candidate. And there's nothing illegal about that. So maybe this information came through hacking, but it's probably more likely that somebody just bought this information.
Right. So it's not necessarily from hacking. I want
to. And there's no evidence one way or the other, but I would say Occam's razor would say somebody got this information through legitimate means.
Right. So who did it end up being?
So funny. So it wound up the Justice Department.
Wait, actually, I want to say quickly. Chris and I talked about this when it first happened, because we both were like raised eyebrows, like this does not seem like it's
and so we literally talked about this. Dr. Thomas Rid raised his eyebrows noon on Wednesday, and Sam and I, so we went for a run. spoiler alert, we I don't mean to break
neighbors.
the fourth wall. I don't mean to break the fourth wall, but we live like literally right next door to one another. We're filming this like in opposite rooms of the same apartment. But we talked about this on Wednesday afternoon, and I said there's a possibility that it might be. My theory at the time was that it was Russia, and so there's.
And why
that
did
had
you
said
think
that-
it was Russia?
So there's actually, and you'll read about it in this book, there's actually a very famous information operation in which Russia pretended to be a white supremacist group back in the 1980s. Prior to the 1984 Olympics, a number of letters were sent to athletes in Africa and Asia purporting to be from the Ku Klux Klan, saying that if you come here, we're going to lynch you and things like that. And it turns out the people who sent those letters weren't from the KKK; they were from the KGB. It was an information op set up by the KGB, and Russia's motivation for doing so was that Russia boycotted the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, and they wanted other countries to boycott the Olympics as well. Right. And so this was their way to get other countries in the third world, and the third world was where both the U.S. and the USSR were kind of competing for influence. Russia wanted, the Soviet Union wanted to get people in the third world to boycott the Olympics in Los Angeles, and so that was their means for doing so.
And I just want to say quickly on that note, I mean, these letters that the supposedly the Ku Klux Klan sent out, that was actually the KGB, were horrifically racist. They threatened violence to the athletes, and the headline, the subject line was "Olympic Games for Humans, Not Apes." I mean, they really went to town in terms of designing this letter. Do you know how quickly did they find out that it was the KGB?
We both have in possession an article that was written in 1984 in the Washington Post. It did take a couple of weeks, but it was relatively quickly snipped out. Not as quickly as this plot. It turns out, and they don't really talk about the technical means by which they did so, but some servers were located in other countries, and various agencies of the U.S. government, including U.S. Cyber Command, the FBI, were able to kind of quickly track this back to Iran.
So Iran were the culprits?
Yes, and Iran is actually becoming a little bit more active on the world stage in terms of misinformation and information operations. Recently was discovered that Iran had hacked some Twitter accounts belonging to legitimate Israeli news sources, and so they use these legitimate news sources to pump out anti-Semitic information. You're aware of the various conspiracy theories they're always trying to spread, right?
Right.
And so they were amplified by Twitter accounts that were pretending to be legitimate journalists with like blue check marks and everything like that. Wow. And so that's how they were able to amplify a lot of this anti-Semitic information.
That's horrible. So what was Iran's? What are the I mean, it's when I struggle with this, it's like Russia obviously wants Trump elected, but it's not. You would think that Iran, because of Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, would actually want Biden to be elected. So, what are they? What are they? Is it just they're just oh, we want to get in on this? What are they doing? What's their point?
So I think we often prescribe a level of sophistication that these organizations simply don't have. And so I want to go back to 2016 with the Information Research Agency, the IRA, what we call the Russian troll farms operations in the U.S. We often focus on their more sophisticated operations. It is known that they were able to organize protests and counter-protests in the same city. So they were able to rally a bunch of right-wing groups who were very anti-Muslim, and a lot of Muslim groups to have a counter-protest. And that's certainly disturbing. But a lot of the people who work for the IRA were simply just banal bureaucrats. They didn't believe in the mission, and so you're not really being graded on the effect of your operations. You're just there to meet a quota. You're told that for 12 hours every day, you have to make X many posts, and so they would just post a lot of crazy things. They would just cut and paste things from Wikipedia. They didn't believe in what they were doing, and so they would just post a lot of junk. I think in this case, Iran just wanted to do things just to do things. And there's a nice parallel.
So they wanted to do things just to do things.
Just to say that they.
But is there not? But I still don't really understand. I mean, don't they have isn't there a strategic purpose? Like I was reading.
Well, funny you mentioned this.
What is
because,
it called? It's called an active.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because there was recently this week there were charges brought against a group of Russian hackers known as Sandworm. They were operating on behalf of Russia's military intelligence agency known as the GRU, and it was said that and I've got a quote here by somebody who actually studied this group, is that this group was doing destructive attacks on a massive scale, but they also seem like they're making it up as they go along. Sometimes it seems like they wake up and just ask themselves, what can we blow up today? And a lot of times,
oh my God.
and you would think that all these agencies
grand strategy, really
wild. You would think that all of these agencies within the Russian government are being controlled by Putin, and they're all working toward this one meticulous goal. And it turns out, that the Russian government, is composed of a lot of competing factions. The intelligence agencies often one up themselves, and sometimes they, try to undermine one another's efforts, and they don't really have a strategic goal. And I think this was the case here. Iran just wanted to do something just to say that they did something.
I think it's an important point too, just to think about how, this is like a job. Like
it is. People go to work every day. Yes. People go to work every day. They don't really believe in their work, and so they'll simply do an operation just so they can say to their boss, we did this massive operation. They don't really care about the effect. They just want to show off to their boss that they did something.
And I was listening today about some Russian right-wing or some like Russian operation where they actually get Americans to write real stories that are like criticizing America to spread in right-wing media. And I'm thinking about like those people's motivation. And I don't think that they're anti-American. I just think that they're like aspiring journalists, and they're yes, this place is going to pay me to write some articles. Great.
Yeah. Well, you'll find that, and this came out shortly after the invasion of Ukraine. Liz Wall basically resigned on air at RT, and when she talks about why she worked for RT, what formerly Russia Today, they call themselves RT. It does not stand for really true. It stands for Russia Today.
Thank you for that clarification.
But she resigned on air, and she gave an interview afterwards, and she realized that journalism is a very difficult profession to be in, and so RT would actually pay you well and allow you to cover global affairs while your colleagues are doing very, covering like petty crime in a local municipality. Yes.
Crap. Journalism is like this. Why do you think I don't do this full time? It's not well paid.
And that was her justification for working for RT. And then she realized, hey, I cannot work for Vladimir Putin anymore. I'm resigning on air.
Yeah. It's wild. All right. So let's keep going. So we talked about this. Oh, so was anything actually hacked in this situation?
It's difficult to say, but I would suspect not. We know that state actors have breached election databases. Russia did in 2016, and it's likely they have tried to do it in 2020. But again, it appears that the Iranians who gained access to this domain bought it through legitimate means. They sent the email through legitimate means. The information that they used to send the emails, the email addresses of the registered Democrats, could have very well been gotten through legitimate means. So there's no reason to suspect a hack. I mean, it's possible, but it's also possible that they got all this information through legitimate means. The New York Times called this a perception hack, which is you create the perception that you had this massive data breach and you compromised the computer system, when in reality you did something that was very, very mundane. And I want to talk about an operation that was done 5 years ago. It was a legitimate hack, but it was a minor hack. In 2015, the Twitter account for U.S. Central Command had been compromised.
Can you just stop and not everybody knows what the heck U.S. Central Command is. What is U.S. Central Command?
So U.S. Central Command, and you'll hear about it in movies, U.S. Central Command. You'll think it's this very sinister agency that is the central command of the entire U.S. military. U.S. Central Command is important because it is the combatant command that deals with the Middle East. So you have 6 geographic combatant commands that deal with North America, South America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and the Pacific. So Central Command is the one that deals with the Middle East. They're important because obviously we do a lot of things in the Middle East, but they are not like the Central Command of the entire U.S. military, as you saw in I think it was like the Red Dawn remake. They talked about it in that way, but they are important. And so one day, Central Command found out that their Twitter account had been hacked. That's not great, but it's a Twitter account, right? A lot of people probably share that account, and so the password is probably very, very easy for a lot of people to remember. And so somebody breached it. Okay, the people that breached it claimed that they were from ISIS, and so the Twitter account for Central Command displayed the black banners. They said, "We are ISIS. We are in your computers." It used very, very similar language to what was actually in this email here. We have access to all your information. And they would post documents that they claimed were taken from a hack of a U.S. military network. Now, here's what I need to bring up, that hacking a Twitter account is much different than breaching a U.S. military network. They're two separate things.
And I'm assuming it's a lot easier to hack a Twitter account than to hack into a U.S. military.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But anyways, they released a number of documents that they claimed they had gotten through hacking U.S. Central Command's network. And as it turns out, the information that they had was information that was obscure but publicly available, like outdated Excel spreadsheets from 10 years ago that had somehow migrated onto the internet, or names of people that were involved in operations against ISIS that had actually come from press releases. So again, they created the perception of a much greater hack when they had really gotten these things through relatively legitimate means. As it turns out, and here's another plot twist, obviously, as we saw here, the people that sent the email were not the Proud Boys. The people that sent the email were Iranian hackers. As it turns out, the people who sent the tweets claiming to be from ISIS weren't from ISIS. Guess where they were from?
Russia.
Russia.
All roads lead to Russia.
So they were actually identified.
Still in the Cold War? Sometimes I'm just like, did this thing ever end? Because we still have this nemesis with Russia. I mean, we're still spying on each other. We're still building up our nuclear arsenal.
So another episode, if I came prepared to talk about that, is that the Heartland and Rimland thesis. But we'll talk about that later on a different run.
Okay, great.
Okay.
How do we know when? You were saying something funny to me the other day about, how do we know when it's not, when it's if, as Americans, we're now being taught now to be a little bit more scrutinizing of information overall, and to not assume that it's coming from who we think it is. So what are some signs? I mean, I think here, you pointed out some really good signs that changing your party affiliation doesn't matter.
Yes.
They have no idea who you voted for. But what are some signs that you could tell that something is not quite kosher?
Yeah, sometimes if things are just too good to be true, they aren't true. Something that confirms your pre-existing biases, are probably not true. And I want to give credit to the tech companies. We often talk badly about Facebook and Twitter. For amplifying the misinformation in 2016, and they're taking much greater steps to clean up all of that pollution today. This is not a partisan statement. QAnon is can I say bullshit on the show?
Yeah.
Okay. QAnon is a bullshit conspiracy theory. There is no basis for it. And I want to give credit to Facebook for, only now, I get it, it's a couple of years late, for cleaning up a lot of that mess, and for Twitter for doing the same. Reddit, because of a very unique ecosystem and what they do, was able to kind of quash that very early, and so a lot of it moved on to Facebook. But good job to Facebook for squashing that. the October surprises that have been coming up recently. Good job for people that are doing the fact checking to make sure that those don't explode into something that they should not be doing. So Twitter is just
what
now.
is the October surprise?
So October surprise refers to the WikiLeaks dumps of October 2016. But as you've seen, there have been a lot of sensational reports recently that the social media companies are really tamping down on, and good for them for doing so. Twitter has actually used a feature recently saying you can't just hit retweet and share that to everybody. You've got to do an extra step to retweet it. Initially, if you want to share something, you have to add your own independent thought to it.
Interesting.
Is
that what they did?
Yes. So it takes 2 steps now to just simply retweet it. If you want to hit the retweet button, it asks you, hey, do you want to add your own independent thought to this?
Do you think that was
tweet?
majorly compelled by Trump's retweet of QAnon's and then saying that he didn't know who QAnon was?
I mean, perhaps, but I mean, there are other ways that coordinated and authentic networks can amplify things by just simply hitting the retweet button, whether it's humans doing it or just bots doing it.
Yeah. Yep. So something else that's been going on is that the New York Times just came out and said that they're actually worried more about Russian hacks in this election than Iranians, with reports that the Russians are hacking into state election systems. What's going on there, and what are the Russians trying to do?
Yeah, and so obviously, so in terms of cyber actors, Iran is a significant. It's a threat, but it's not the threat that the Russians or even the Chinese are. And all of these nations actually have their own goals. Kind of the 4 primary adversaries the U.S. has: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They all have cyber capabilities, but they all approach it in a different way. Russia is more interested in political influence. We don't know the full extent of it, but they penetrated state election systems in 2016. We know from the indictment of the Russian hackers, which was filed in 2018, that these systems were breached, but that no information was ever altered or anything like that. It's possible they may be doing the same. During my master's thesis, I looked at the 2016 election, and I wondered, why would they not change any votes?
So basically, you're saying that they hacked into the election systems in 2016, but they didn't actually change any data.
That's correct, and that was the conclusion of Special Counsel Robert Mueller in 2018 when he indicted the Russian hackers for a variety of activities, including hacking the DNC and ultimately hacking state election databases. I thought that perhaps they did not change any information because it would have been simply too far. And I write this in my master's thesis. Changing any votes would potentially invalidate the entire election. It's never been done in our history, but I think that was one reason they didn't do so, because it could backfire. I think it was also a hedge against a Clinton victory. And I thought that, during the election, now President Trump had said the system is rigged. The WikiLeaks documents had, shown Democrats deriding Bernie Sanders in favor of Secretary Clinton. Had Secretary Clinton won, as many people thought that she would have done, most polling agencies thought that she was in the lead at that point. And I think most people thought that she would be the president, on that day in November. It was a good hedge against a victory because had she won, Donald Trump could say the system is rigged, Russians hacked into the system, and there would be evidence for that.
So it was a way, basically, to if Secretary Clinton had won, to then say, "Oh, this was illegitimate." Yes,
that's one explanation, and perhaps that's being done again.
But are they doing the same thing then now of hedging against a Biden victory?
It's entirely possible that they're doing the same thing now to discredit the election, regardless of who wins. If you don't have faith in the election, in the electoral system, you don't have faith in this country.
If you don't have faith in the electoral system, you don't have faith in this country. I mean, I have no faith in the Electoral College, but that's another story.
But I mean, if you have no faith in the fact that your vote matters, that
right.
When you cast a ballot that it will be counted, what faith do you have in this country as a democracy?
Right. So how do you think? I mean, how do we, with it, people watching this show, knowing that there is some Russian crap going on, and Iranians are hijacking Proud Boy,
Yeah.
websites. How
Yeah.
can voters feel sure that their vote?
Well, there are a
won't
couple
be
ways to
hacked?
kind of feel better. Our voting election infrastructure is very large. It's very complex. Obviously we have all of these states and all these municipalities. It's very redundant. In order to affect the vote on a very, very large scale, you would have to execute a massive cyber campaign because you're dealing with all of these counties, all of these states with their own election systems. And each state has their own, companies that they go to provide their election infrastructure. So the sheer unwieldy complexity of that is actually kind of a strength, right?
Meaning it's such a cluster F, like it's so complicated and it's so webbed
Yes.
out that like it's just too complicated to hack
Yeah,
into.
it's too difficult to hack. So there is that. Obviously, we think that the cybersecurity has gotten better, especially not only on defensive cyber, and people are taking this threat more seriously, but also, government agencies are taking the fight overseas. We're not exactly certain how effective it will be, but recently it was revealed that actions were taken against a malware network, a botnet known as TrickBot, which is thought to be the largest botnet in the world. And basically, it's a network of 3 million infected computers run by what are suspected to be Russian-speaking criminals. Okay, more on that later. Who often offer their services for hire for services like ransomware attacks or things like that. So there was a kind of a two-pronged attack. U.S. Central Command did an offensive operation against this botnet. Simultaneously, Microsoft and other tech companies filed legal action against this network, shutting down a lot of their servers, claiming that if you use Microsoft software for malicious purposes, that violates a copyright agreement. And you know what? A judge bought off on it and shut down parts of this botnet. It's had a bit of a temporary effect. It'll probably come back online. One thing to note is that there's kind of a strange nexus between Russian cyber criminals and the Russian government. Many people believe that there's kind of this tacit agreement that the Russian intelligence services turn a blind eye to Russian cyber criminals for conducting overseas attacks. Kind of the unwritten agreement is attack whomever you want overseas, just don't attack Russians. And occasionally...
But so what if in that situation, what if Russian, non-state hackers decided to attack the Republicans, and Putin obviously wants Trump to win? In that case, are they still in?
But what would be your financial incentive to attack an American political party? They're criminals. Okay, there's got to be a financial incentive. However, occasionally the Russian intelligence services, knowing that these people are criminals, will occasionally call them in, ask them for a favor. We'll give you whatever immunity if you execute X operation. There were a number of instances in which the Russian troll farm, the IRA, committed just some mundane identity fraud. And I think that they called in a favor from the Russian hacking underground to do this favor for them. And they used this identity fraud to purchase ads on Facebook.
So what about, we're talking about cyber with regards specifically to this election, but cybersecurity has become a huge issue on the national security agenda.
Yes.
In terms of, can you explain a little bit about kind of cyber, I liked your term cyber hygiene,
yes.
but, cybersecurity with regards
Yes.
to our broader national security agenda and like why it's important and...
Yeah, we talk about obviously we have broad sweeping agendas and things like that, but things that most of us can do is just practice good cyber hygiene as a nation. Obviously making sure that you're not clicking on malicious links and things like that.
Just don't tell my mom to have 30 passwords for different things,
Yeah,
please,
well,
because she can't remember her password to anything. She spends hours online trying to log in.
That's why you need a password manager to keep all these straight. Because yes, one way to get yourself in trouble is recycling passwords, and I know that I've been guilty of it as well. But a good password manager will help you build strong passwords, and it'll help you kind of remember those passwords. One of the things about reusing the passwords is that you're wedded to that password. You remember it forever. But a password manager, if you build a strong password and that site is breached, well, you're not wedded to building a new password or a similar password. You'll just generate another strong password.
Sorry. So I was saying, with regards to the broader national security agenda, where does like cybersecurity fit into the kind of broader scope of national security?
I mean, it's just now been elevated. So it used to be, obviously in ancient history, you had one, what we call it, domain of warfare. So people started fighting on the land. Then they discovered that there was a second domain called the sea. 120 years ago, they discovered the air you could fight in. And then now we've added two different warfighting domains, space and cyberspace.
Wait, so then we have a space force. Do we have a cyber force?
We don't have a cyber force yet, but we do have a cyber command.
Do you think we would have a cyber force that's specifically
so
just working on those issues?
You know what? It's not a crazy idea. It's actually been proposed by Admiral James Stavridis.
Know him?
A fellow. Yes, I sorry to mansplain Stavridis.
Fletcher Dean, proud Fletcher alum here.
It's also been recommended in an article by General David Barno and Dr. Nora Benzahel. A cyber force would probably need to have different legal authorities from the regular DoD. Just like we have a Coast Guard that does like a law enforcement mission, and they have a different legal authority. If you wanted a cyber force to, protect American networks and things like that, it would probably need to have some sort of a law enforcement capacity to, attack cyber criminals. Just simply due to the fact that, cyber threats could come from within, they could come without. People could be coordinated together. You would need probably a different mandate for that force.
Sorry, I was just thinking about something.
Mm-hmm.
Last question. What's China up to? Because I know China. What's their? We talked about our main nemesis, Russia and Iran.
Yeah. So there was a thwarted attempt. China was trying to hack some of the campaigns. China is more into like intellectual property theft and things like that. So for probably the last 20 years, intellectual property theft can take many forms. If you've ever gone to China, and my father went to China on vacation, and he bought a North Face jacket that was not made by North Face. Yeah, but that's intellectual property theft. You're stealing somebody's copyright. And China is just doing this on a much grander scale. Culturally, they have a much different attitude towards intellectual property. If you publish a book, that's your property. Your name goes on it. You take ownership of that. If you publish, if you have some idea in China, it's not your idea. It belongs to the collective. So they have a very different attitude culturally towards intellectual property that makes it very difficult to kind of litigate against.
Okay, so we're kind of out of time. Any kind of parting words that you want to share with regards to cybercrime and what to watch out for, what to be wary of?
I don't know. Leading up into the election, where we got less than 2 weeks. Oh my God, probably about 10 days now left.
I know, isn't that wild?
10 days left until the election. Anything could happen. Be careful of the news that's coming out. Don't react too quickly to anything. Be sure to verify your sources. Be wary of further October or even November surprises. And even then, I don't know what's going to happen on the night of November 3rd, but it's likely, the election, given the huge number of mail-in ballots, could not be decided on November 3rd. I know you're voting in Florida. I don't know how long your state has to accept your vote, but I mean, in many states, if your vote is postmarked on November 3rd, given X many days mailing, it's going to take some time for it to come in.
I was actually going to make that point when I begged everyone to vote at the end of this show. It is actually,
I already did.
Yeah, it's really important actually to call your Board of Elections and to see, does your ballot have to be postmarked by
Yes.
the November 3rd, or does it have to
Mhm.
be received by? So Florida, actually, your ballot has to be received by November 3rd.
Okay. Yes.
So it's important to know that, because I think there will be a lot of people that are like, oh, it just has to be postmarked, like, and lots of people
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
want to pay for overnight. But
Yeah. Yeah. And also verify that your vote was actually accepted. I put mine in the mail.
and how do you do
and
that, Chris? How do people do that?
So strangely enough, and I hate to just say this, but I Googled, how to verify if your vote is received, and PC Mag had a nice website, which went down state by state or the District of Columbia, that said, click here. Here's how to go to your state or district's Board of Elections and verify that your vote was actually received. And I know mine was received on October 14th.
And does it show that it was also counted?
I know that it was accepted. I don't know that it was counted. I don't, and it may vary by states. I had always heard that, if your vote would not have made the difference, that your vote is not counted. Like, so let's say you are in a state where that was overwhelmingly for candidate X, and they received maybe 100 extra absentee ballots. Well, they're not going to count the absentee ballots because it's not going to make the difference. I think that given the sheer number of absentee ballots this year,
I mean, I feel like some states will probably have, could have a majority of mail-in ballots.
And even then,
wild.
okay, maybe your vote is a very safe district for the president. Maybe your vote is not a very safe district for the mayor or a council person. Your vote, we talk about presidential elections and congressional elections. State and local elections matter as well. I mean, they do great things for us as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to point out too is that the president is not the only person on the ballot. And
Yes.
so if you are a Democrat or a Republican and you go to your local Democratic office's website or Republican's website, they'll have what's called a sample ballot. So they'll say, this is how we recommend you vote on this amendment, on this judge. Because it can be confusing, especially when you're voting for judges that are on the state courts. It actually doesn't even put if they're Republican or Democrat.
And a lot of times there's not a lot of information available on like your alderman or your judge or things like that.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, Chris, this has been an amazing interview. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel safer. I feel so secure from a cyber perspective with you as my friend. How do people subscribe to your newsletter?
Okay, it's crispin.substack.com.
Okay, let me just put that in the chat. So it's
crispin.substack.com.
www.crispin.substack.com.
Yep.
And then what is the gray zone exactly? What is it?
So I think the best definition, and I don't have it memorized, comes from the State Department, but it's a state of
No, I mean,
relations.
what is the newsletter? What's the newsletter?
The newsletter talks about the state of politics between peace and war, and talks also about the role of technology. So two countries may be at peace, but they still compete through cyber means, through information means, through drone strikes. I've looked at the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh recently, what's been happening there between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and a number of regional actors that are also trying to influence the area through proxy forces. So, whereas a lot of people find it interesting, very easy to deal with, the large clash of armies and kind of like that Napoleonic or World War II sense, I'm looking at war in a very different sense.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. I really appreciate you being here with me and exploring this. I think a lot of people, when they hear the word cybersecurity, it's a little bit intimidating. Like they don't really know what that means.
Hey, there's also Swift on security. Taylor Swift, the cybersecurity expert. I recommend you follow her on Twitter.
Wait, what is that?
So Taylor Swift is not actually a cybersecurity expert, but somebody thought that people would pay attention to cybersecurity if they said that Taylor Swift was a cybersecurity expert. So there's a Twitter account called Swift on Security.
That's bizarro.
In which, pictures of Taylor Swift give you nice cybersecurity advice, like don't use unscripted code, use a password manager.
That is so bizarre. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris.
I mean, haters gonna hate.
Thank you, and I hope everyone here will dance like Russia isn't watching.
Okay, thanks.
Take
Bye.
care. Well, that was fascinating. Thinking about, we're entering an era of a new type of war. cyber warfare. Like it's insidious, it's bizarre. It doesn't seem to be all that strategic, and so finding new ways to fight this, whether from a military perspective or also from the company perspective. There have been huge hacks of Sony, for example. I think is an evolving issue that is really going to need to pay attention to. And I was joking the other day, it's like, if we were to get rid of fracking, or let's take all like the coal mining jobs and train all these people in cybersecurity, because clearly we're going to need far more people as the internet just grows and expands to confront this growing threat. So happy that you joined us today. Next week, on October 30th, Milan Verveer is going to be on the show. Milan Verveer is amazing. She was the first ambassador for global women's issues at the State Department. She also is the head of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. Incredible woman. Could have been Secretary of State easily. And this is a public service announcement. Vote. Your vote matters. It doesn't matter if you're in a blue state, a red state, a purple state. Vote. It is your duty as an American citizen. I remember when I was working on the Hillary campaign and I had, immigrants say to me, I wish I could vote. It is a privilege to be able to vote for the President of the United States and for every other elected office. So please, use your voice, get out there. If you haven't requested your absentee ballot, you need to do it yesterday, and then make sure it comes to you and overnight it back if you have to. Also consider, if you want to know where your voting place is, your early voting place is, you can go to iwillvote.com, and that has all sorts of things. The other thing is volunteer. If you just search Democrats volunteer, Republicans volunteer, you'll find the websites where you can volunteer. Every little last bit counts. There's only 11 days yet, but nothing is a sure bet for either party. So if you can, if you're young and you can go knock on doors in Pennsylvania or North Carolina or one of the swing states, for the last couple of days before the election, that will matter. Some people do need that extra push to get out to go to the polls. They need a plan. They may need a ride. You just never know what people are struggling with. They might not know where their voting place is. I remember, I was at an old lady's house in Florida, a Hispanic woman, and she didn't have a ride. I mean, her daughter was out with the car. I actually gave her a ride to the polls, which in COVID times is a little more difficult, but some people physically cannot get there, and they need that help. Babysit for your friends that have kids and are homeschooling them so that they can go vote. So important to vote. So I think that's it. So thanks again for joining in today for Samanthropolitics, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care.